A 7-month pregnant wife, a Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park, and a love story that magazines called a modern fairy tale. Yasmin Redford had it all. Her husband, tech billionaire Howard Redford, was the man who had everything, and he'd given it all to her. So when he told her he was flying to St. Bart's for a final solitary retreat before their baby arrived, she kissed him goodbye. But billionaires don't fly commercial, and when a private jet's manifest is leaked, secrets have nowhere to hide. Howard wasn't alone. He was with his mistress on a lavish Babymoon celebrating a different baby. What he didn't know was that while he was sipping champagne at 40,000 feet, his pregnant wife was meeting with the most ruthless divorce attorney in New York. The divorce papers were already drafted. The courier was already booked. And paradise was about to become a prison. The city lights of Manhattan glittered below the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, a sprawling universe of captured stars. To Yasmin Vanderbilt Redford, they were just part of the wallpaper of her life, a life so meticulously curated for perfection, it felt at times like a museum exhibit. She was the primary installation, the beautiful, intelligent wife of Howard Redford, the boy wonder of the fintech world. At 33, Howard was a force of nature. He had the restless energy of a man who believed he could bend the world to his will, and the track record to prove it. His company, Nexus Capital, had revolutionized algorithmic trading, making him a billionaire before his 30th birthday. He was handsome in a way that seemed almost unfair. Sharp jaw eyes the color of a stormy sea that held a perpetual spark of ambition, and a smile that could disarm world leaders and charm seasoned investors with equal ease. They had met at a charity gala 5 years prior. Yasmin, then a rising star in the art curation world, possessed a quiet grace and a formidable intellect that Howard found captivating. She wasn't just another socialite drawn to his flame. She challenged him, debated with him, and saw the man behind the myth. Her family, the Vanderbilts, were old money steeped in traditions, and a quiet, unshakable influence that made Howard's new money flashiness seem almost crude in comparison. Their union was a merger of dynasties, a storybook romance that graced the covers of Vogue and Forbes simultaneously. Their home was a testament to their combined aesthetics. Howard's sleek minimalist tech seamlessly integrated with Yasmin's priceless collection of contemporary art and antique furniture. It was a palace in the sky on the 78th floor of 157, a monument to their success, their power, their love. And now, at 29, Yasmin was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son. The final piece of the perfect picture was about to be set in place. She ran a hand over the gentle, firm swell of her belly, a protective primal gesture that had become second nature. The baby kicked, a fluttering reminder of the new life she was nurturing. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that rarely made it past the fortress of her public composure. "He's active tonight," she'd said an hour ago, hoping to draw Howard away from the holographic stock ticker glowing faintly in his home office. Howard had looked up, his focus slow to shift. "That's my boy. Already planning his market takeover." He'd smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. His gaze was distant, his mind clearly still crunching numbers and closing deals a world away. This distance was a new thing, a subtle but persistent chill that had crept into their gilded cage over the past few months. At first, Yasmin had dismissed it as stress. Nexus Capital was in the middle of a massive global expansion, and Howard was pushing himself, as always, to the brink. There were more late nights at the office, more hushed phone calls taken in rooms he'd just exited, more weekends consumed by emergency board meetings. "It's the final push, darling," he'd assured her, stroking her hair, as she lay beside him in their cavernous bed. "Once the Asia deal is closed, it's just you and me and the little guy. I promise." Yasmin, wanting to believe him, had accepted it. She was a supportive wife, the anchor to his stratospheric ambition. But a thread of unease had been pulled, and now she couldn't stop it from unraveling the tapestry of their perfect life. The real shift, the one that planted a seed of cold dread in her heart, had a name: Chloe Sterling. Chloe was Howard's new protege, a 25-year-old coding prodigy from MIT. She was brilliant, beautiful, and possessed an ambition that mirrored Howard's own. He spoke of her with a reverence that bordered on obsessive. "She sees the market in a way no one else does," he'd say. "She's the future of the company." Yasmin had met her once at a company dinner. Chloe was a whirlwind of youthful energy with wide, doe-like eyes and a cascade of raven hair. She hung on Howard's every word, her hand brushing his arm a little too often, her laughter a little too loud, a little too intimate. Yasmin, a connoisseur of social subtleties, had recognized the performance instantly. It was the calculated, hungry ambition of a predator disguised as hero worship. She had felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. When she had gently mentioned to Howard that Chloe's professional admiration seemed to blur boundaries, he had become uncharacteristically defensive. "Don't be ridiculous, Yasmin," he'd snapped, his voice sharp. "You're being insecure. She's a kid. She's vital to the company. I can't have you making my top talent feel uncomfortable because you're feeling hormonal." The word hung in the air between them, ugly and dismissive. Hormonal. He had never spoken to her like that before. It was a dismissal not just of her concern, but of her perception of her very reality. The argument had escalated their first real venomous fight. They had reconciled, of course, with Howard, apologizing profusely, blaming his stress, and buying her a breathtaking diamond bracelet from Harry Winston as a peace offering. She wore it now, its cold weight a constant glittering reminder of that crack in their foundation. Tonight the unease was a physical presence in the silent penthouse. Howard was packing. He had announced it 2 days ago. "I need a break before the baby comes," he'd said, avoiding her eyes as he stared out at the city. "Just a few days to clear my head. I've booked a trip. St. Bart's. Just me. I need to disconnect to come back ready to be a father." Yasmin's heart had constricted. St. Bart's was their place. It was where he had proposed on the pristine white sands of Saline Beach. The thought of him there alone felt wrong, a desecration of a shared memory. Why alone? "Howard," she had asked, her voice quiet. "We could go together. A babymoon. Most couples do that." "You can't fly, Yasmin," he'd replied quickly, a little too quickly. "Doctor's orders. It's too close to your due date. It's not safe." She knew he was right about the flying restrictions, but the excuse felt hollow, a prepackaged, convenient truth. Still, she had relented. To fight him on it would only push him further away, would only validate his accusation of her being insecure and controlling. So she had smiled, helped him choose what to pack, and pretended to be the understanding, supportive wife. Now she stood in the doorway of their enormous walk-in closet, a space larger than most Manhattan apartments. Howard was carefully folding a lightweight linen shirt into his designer suitcase. He was packing for warm weather, for relaxation, for paradise. But as he reached into the back of his drawer, he palmed a small, unfamiliar box, and thinking she wasn't looking, slipped it into the side pocket of his carry-on. It wasn't a watch box or a cufflink box. It was smaller, more delicate. The size of a box for a woman's necklace, or perhaps a ring. Yasmin's blood ran cold. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She said nothing. She simply watched her mind, a maelstrom of denial and terrifying certainty. He was going to St. Bart's, their special place, but he was not going alone. And he was bringing a gift. She retreated silently from the doorway, her hand protectively on her belly. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing his mother's distress. In the reflection of the vast dark window, Yasmin saw herself, a woman standing on the precipice of a great fall, the glittering city lights behind her no longer looking like stars, but like the cold, indifferent eyes of a world that was about to watch her perfect life shatter into a million pieces. The gilded cage had become a trap, and she was just beginning to realize the door had been locked from the outside. The kiss Howard gave her at the door was as fleeting as it was cold, a ghost of a touch against her cheek. "I'll call you when I land, darling," he said, the endearment sounding rehearsed. I love you. I love you too. Yasmin whispered the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. She watched the elevator doors slide shut, encasing him in polished brass, and the finality of it felt like a guillotine's drop. The silence he left behind was immense, a roaring vacuum where the hum of his presence used to be. For an hour, she did nothing. She simply stood in the grand foyer, her hand resting on a cool marble console table, her mind refusing to process the implications of the little box and the distant look in her husband's eyes. Denial was a warm, comforting blanket, and she wanted to wrap herself in it to sleep until he came back and proved her fears were nothing more than the paranoid fantasies of a hormonal pregnant woman. But Yasmin Vanderbilt Redford was not a woman who wallowed in denial for long. Her breeding, her education, her very nature were rooted in analysis and action. She had managed art galleries, negotiated with ruthless collectors, and navigated the treacherous social waters of New York's elite. She was a strategist. With a newfound icy resolve, she walked into Howard's home office. The room was his sanctuary, a temple of chrome and black leather. His primary desktop computer was locked, protected by a password so complex it was likely a string of code. But Howard was a creature of habit, and in his arrogance, convenience often trumped security. His personal laptop sat on the corner of the desk, still logged in. Her hands trembled as she moved the mouse. The screen flickered to life, showing a half-finished email to his legal team about the Asia expansion. Her guilt was a sharp stabbing pain, but her suspicion was a roaring fire that consumed it. Where to even begin his emails? His calendar. She started with his browser history. Her eyes scanned the list, mostly financial news sites, tech blogs, and links to Nexus Capital's internal servers. Then she saw it. A series of searches from the past week, all centered around St. Bart's. Best private villas. St. Bart's, chef-catered meals. St. Bart's, jewelry stores. Gustavia Cartier, Trinity, necklace price, and then the one that made her breath catch in her throat. St. Bart's, medical clinic, obstetrics. The word pulsed on the screen. Why would he be looking up pregnancy-related medical care in St. Bart's? He had told her she couldn't fly. The only possible reason was that he was going with someone else who was pregnant. The pieces slammed together in her mind with brutal, sickening force. The distant behavior, the constant talk of his brilliant protégé. Chloe. The late nights weren't about work. They were about her. The hushed calls weren't to his board. They were to his mistress. The little box wasn't for a future surprise for Yasmin. It was a Cartier necklace for the other woman he had gotten pregnant. The Babymoon he was taking wasn't to prepare for fatherhood with his wife. It was to celebrate a new family he was starting with his employee. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself, a low, wounded sound escaping her lips. The betrayal was absolute, a multi-layered act of cruelty so profound it was almost elegant in its depravity. He wasn't just cheating. He was replacing her. He was taking their special place, their Babymoon, their future, and giving it to someone else. Her grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. The life she had built, the man she loved, the future she was carrying in her womb, it was all a lie. A meticulously constructed, beautifully presented lie. But then through the fog of pain, a different feeling began to surface. It started as a spark in the pit of her stomach and grew into a wildfire of pure, unadulterated rage. It was the fury of a woman scorned, yes. But more than that, it was the protective rage of a mother. This man, her husband, was not just betraying her. He was betraying their unborn son. He was creating a world of chaos and deception for his child before he even took his first breath. Yasmin wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her expression hardening. She was not a victim to be pitied. She was a Vanderbilt. She was a Redford, and she would not be erased. She returned to the laptop, her movements now precise and clinical. She needed more than just suspicion. She needed undeniable proof. She navigated to a travel folder she knew he kept. It was filled with itineraries from his past business trips. And there it was. A new file created 2 weeks ago. SBH Retreat. She clicked it open. The confirmation was for a 7-night stay at the Elysian Villas, the most exclusive and private resort on the island, a place so luxurious it made their usual 5-star haunts look common. The booking was for the Villa Serafina, a secluded 3-bedroom compound with a private beach, a full staff, and an infinity pool that melted into the Caribbean Sea. And then she saw the flight details. A private Gulfstream G650 chartered from a discreet aviation firm. Her eyes scanned the passenger manifest. 2 names: Howard Redford, Chloe Sterling. There it was, the black and white indisputable proof. Her heart didn't break this time. It turned to stone. She saved a copy of the entire itinerary to a hidden file on a secure cloud server she had maintained since her gallery days. She photographed the screen with her phone. Evidence. She thought about what to do next. Call him, confront him when he returned. The thought of a screaming match, of his inevitable gaslighting and false apologies, filled her with disgust. It was beneath her. It was unproductive. A messy emotional confrontation was what he would expect. He would use her pregnancy, her hormones, against her. He would try to manage the situation to control the narrative just as he controlled everything else. No, she would not give him that satisfaction. She would not play his game. She would invent a new one with new rules. Her mind went to her prenuptial agreement. At the time, it had felt like a formality, a distasteful but necessary piece of paperwork for a man of Howard's wealth. Her own family lawyer had insisted on certain clauses. Clauses Yasmin had barely paid attention to. She remembered one specifically, an infidelity clause. It was ironclad. In the event of proven adultery, the division of assets shifted dramatically in her favor. Her lawyer, a shrewd old man named Samuel Blackwood, had called it the Apocalypse Clause. At the time she had laughed. Now it was her weapon. But Samuel was a family friend, gentle and diplomatic. She needed more than that. She needed a warrior. She needed someone who would not just handle a divorce, but orchestrate a takedown. There was only one name that came to mind, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in the elite circles of New York. Eleanor Vance. Vance wasn't just a lawyer. She was a legend, a titan of matrimonial law who had dismantled the empires of some of the most powerful men in the country. She was brilliant, ruthless, and devastatingly expensive. She took on only a handful of cases a year, and she never lost. Yasmin stood up, her back straight, her resolve absolute. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. Howard thought he was in paradise, celebrating his new life. He had no idea he was flying into the eye of a hurricane named Yasmin. She picked up her phone not to call her husband, but to make the most important call of her life. She found the number for Eleanor Vance's private office. As the phone began to ring, she looked out the window again. The city lights no longer seemed indifferent. They seemed like an army waiting for her command. Eleanor Vance's office. A crisp voice answered. "My name is Yasmin Redford," she said, her voice steady and clear, devoid of any tremble. "I need to schedule an immediate and confidential consultation with Ms. Vance. It's a matter of some urgency." The game was on. The offices of Vance and Associates were located in the Seagram building on Park Avenue, a masterpiece of corporate modernism that projected an aura of untouchable power. The interior was surprisingly serene, decorated in muted tones of gray cream and slate. It was a place designed to calm frayed nerves and focus the mind on the cold, hard calculus of divorce. Yasmin was led into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city. Eleanor Vance rose from behind a large, imposing desk made of polished obsidian. She was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored Armani suit. Her silver hair was cut in a sharp geometric bob, and her eyes, behind a pair of severe-looking glasses, were the color of chips of ice. They missed nothing. "Mrs. Redford," she said, her voice a low, modulated instrument of command. She didn't offer a handshake but gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Thank you for coming in. Your call was compelling." Yasmin sat placing her crocodile Hermes bag beside her. She felt a strange sense of calm. In this room with this woman, her chaotic emotions were liabilities. Only facts mattered. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Ms. Vance. Please, call me Eleanor. In my experience, urgency of this nature means the stakes are high. So tell me, Yasmin, why are you here?" Without preamble, Yasmin laid out the story. She spoke with a detached precision that belied the raw wound in her soul. She detailed Howard's recent behavior, the discovery of his secret relationship with Chloe Sterling, the damning evidence on his laptop, the resort booking the private jet, manifest the search history for prenatal care and Cartier necklaces. She spoke of their assets, the penthouse, the art collection, the shares in Nexus Capital, held in her name as part of their marital agreement. She concluded by mentioning the infidelity clause in her prenup. Throughout her account, Eleanor Vance was perfectly still. She didn't take notes. She simply listened, her icy gaze fixed on Yasmin's face, absorbing every detail, every nuance. When Yasmin finished, a long silence stretched between them. Finally, Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "And your husband is at this moment at the Elysian Villas in St. Bart's with his pregnant mistress?" "That is correct," Yasmin confirmed. "He believes you are at home awaiting his return, none the wiser." "Yes." Eleanor's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. It was not a smile of warmth, but of appreciation for a particularly interesting strategic problem. "Good," she said softly. "The element of surprise is our greatest asset. Most women in your position would have called him screaming. They would have given him time to hide assets, to create a counter-narrative, to prepare for war. You did not. That tells me you are not most women." Yasmin felt a flicker of pride. "I have no intention of letting him control this." "Excellent," Eleanor said, her voice gaining a steely edge. "Because we are not going to file for divorce in the traditional way. A quiet filing gives him time to react, to move his money through the labyrinthine shell corporations men like your husband are so fond of. No, we are going to execute what I like to call a decapitation strike." She stood up and walked to the window, her back to Yasmin as she surveyed the city below. "We will file a petition for dissolution of marriage with the New York Supreme Court first thing tomorrow morning. Simultaneously, we will file an ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order. This is key. We will ask the judge to freeze every known asset: bank accounts, brokerage accounts, credit cards, property titles, personal and corporate. We will argue that there is a significant risk of dissipation of marital assets. A fancy way of saying your billionaire husband is about to hide his money now that he's been caught. Given that he is currently out of the country with his paramour, on whom he is clearly spending lavishly, the judge will almost certainly grant it." Yasmin listened, captivated by the cold, brutal efficiency of the plan. Eleanor turned back to face her. "The order, once signed by the judge, will be transmitted electronically to every financial institution. By midday tomorrow, Howard Redford will be a billionaire on paper, but he won't be able to buy a cup of coffee. His corporate accounts at Nexus Capital will be frozen. Payroll, vendor payments, everything. The company will be paralyzed. This will force him to the negotiating table immediately and on our terms." The scale of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a corporate siege. "He'll be furious," Yasmin breathed. "That is the point," Eleanor replied. "A furious man makes mistakes. A panicked man gives concessions. We want him shocked, stranded, and powerless. Which brings me to the delivery." She returned to her desk and fixed Yasmin with an intense look. "We will not have a grubby process server from the city accost him. This needs to be a moment of maximum psychological impact. We will hire a high-end international courier service. A professional in a suit will arrive at his private villa in paradise. They will hand-deliver a package containing the summons, the divorce petition, and a copy of the judge's freezing order. He will be sunning himself with his mistress one moment and financially castrated the next. A vision flashed in Yasmin's mind. Howard poolside, his confident smile dissolving into disbelief and horror. The satisfaction was a dark, heady poison. "There is one more thing," Eleanor continued, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "I want you to write him a note. A short one. To be included in the package. Nothing emotional. Nothing angry. Just a simple, clear message that this is your decision. It's important that the final blow comes from you." The next 24 hours were a blur of focused activity. Yasmin worked tirelessly with Eleanor's team of forensic accountants and legal aides. She provided them with every piece of financial information she had. Account numbers, she had memorized names of his private bankers, details of their property holdings in London and the Hamptons. She proved to be a formidable resource, her mind sharp and her memory for detail exact. Her years of managing multi-million-dollar art acquisitions had made her fluent in the language of money and assets. As the legal machinery churned, Yasmin felt a profound shift within herself. The grief, while still present, was packed away in a locked room in her heart. In its place was a cold, driving purpose. She was no longer just Yasmin Redford, the wife. She was a general commanding an army, moving pieces on a chessboard of immense consequence. She did it all while fielding Howard's daily calls from St. Bart's. "Hello, darling," he'd said on the first call, his voice breezy and warm. "The weather is incredible. You would love it. I wish you were here." "I wish I were there, too," she'd replied, her voice a perfect imitation of wistful longing. The ease with which she lied was terrifying, a skill she hadn't known she possessed. She was a performer, just like Chloe. "How are you feeling? How's the little guy?" "We're fine," she said, one hand on her belly. "Just missing you." Each lie was a small piece of her soul chipping away, but she held firm. She was protecting her son, building a firewall around their future. On the morning the papers were to be filed, Yasmin sat at her own desk, a delicate antique piece of furniture that stood in stark contrast to the brutal modernity of Howard's office. She took out a sheet of her personalized, cream-colored stationery. Her handwriting, usually a graceful, flowing script, was now tight and controlled. Eleanor had advised her to be concise. She thought for a long time, the pen hovering over the paper. What could she say to the man who was the love of her life and the architect of her greatest pain? In the end, she wrote only 2 sentences. 2 sentences that conveyed everything he needed to know. "Howard, I know about Chloe. I know about the baby. Enjoy St. Bart's. Yasmin." She sealed the note in its matching envelope. It was the most civilized and yet the most savage thing she had ever done. Late that afternoon, Eleanor called. "The judge has signed the order," she said, a note of triumph in her voice. "The wire transfers to the banks are complete. The assets are frozen. The courier is on a flight to St. Martin and will take a private charter to St. Bart's. He will deliver the package to Villa Serafina tomorrow at noon local time." Yasmin hung up the phone. It was done. The storm she had gathered was about to make landfall. She walked over to the vast window and looked down at the city. Far below, a yellow taxi, impossibly small, navigated the canyons of steel and glass. She felt a kinship with it, a small but determined entity moving with purpose through a world of giants. Howard had once told her that in his business, timing was everything. You had to know the exact moment to strike to ensure maximum gain. It seemed she had learned his lessons well. Tomorrow at noon, in his sun-drenched paradise, Howard Redford would learn that his wife was a much better student than he had ever imagined. The Caribbean sun was a benevolent god, casting a brilliant, warm glow over the island of St. Bart's. In the exclusive enclave of the Elysian Villas, perched high on the cliffs overlooking Governor Beach Paradise, was a tangible reality. At Villa Serafina, the sound was of gentle waves kissing a private stretch of sand, the clinking of ice in crystal glasses, and the soft, satisfied laughter of its 2 occupants. Howard Redford lay on a plush white sun lounger, a picture of contented masculinity. He had shed the tension of New York like a heavy coat. His skin was bronzed, his eyes shielded by designer sunglasses were closed in blissful repose. Beside him, Chloe Sterling glowed. Her pregnancy, just entering its 5th month, was a neat, compact bump under her stylish bikini. She ran a hand through her dark hair, her eyes sparkling with a triumphant light as she gazed at the man beside her. "Isn't it perfect, Jules?" she murmured, leaning over to kiss his shoulder. "Just perfect. Almost perfect," he said, opening his eyes and smiling at her. He reached into the beach bag beside him and pulled out the small navy blue Cartier box. This might help. Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She opened the box to reveal the Trinity necklace, 3 intertwined bands of rose yellow and white gold. It was delicate, iconic, and impossibly expensive. "Oh, Howard," she breathed, her eyes welling with tears. "It's beautiful." "A symbol," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "For us. For our new beginning. A new family." He conveniently ignored the fact that he was still married, that he had a wife 7 months pregnant with his firstborn son in New York. In this sun-drenched bubble, that Yasmin felt a million miles away. Here with Chloe, he was reborn, unshackled from the weight of old money and tradition that Yasmin represented. Chloe was his future, a reflection of his own voracious ambition. As he fastened the necklace around her neck, a man appeared at the edge of the terrace. He was dressed not in resort wear, but in a lightweight gray business suit. He held a sleek leather portfolio. He was discreet, professional, and utterly out of place. Jean-Pierre, the villa's butler, followed a step behind him, looking flustered. "Monsieur Redford, my apologies." This gentleman insisted. "A delivery for you." Howard's brow furrowed in annoyance. "I'm not expecting anything." The courier stepped forward. "Mr. Howard Redford?" he asked, his accent vaguely European. "Yes." Howard answered, his tone clipped. "I have an urgent personal delivery for you from New York." He extended the thick document-sized envelope. It was heavy, official-looking. Howard sighed, taking the package. He assumed it was from his office, some tedious document the board needed him to sign. "Fine, thank you," he said dismissively, placing it on the table beside him, intending to ignore it. "Sir," the courier said, not moving, "my instructions are to wait until you have personally opened the package and acknowledged its contents." Howard shot him a look of pure irritation. The arrogance of it was astounding. "Instructions from whom?" "From the office of Eleanor Vance, on behalf of your wife, Mrs. Yasmin Redford." The name hit Howard like a physical blow. Eleanor Vance. He knew that name. Every billionaire in New York knew that name. It was a name synonymous with ruin. And then on behalf of your wife, Yasmin. The blood drained from his face. The warm, benevolent sun suddenly felt cold and menacing. Chloe, sensing the drastic shift in his demeanor, sat up straight, her hand protectively on the new necklace. "Jules, what is it? Who is Eleanor Vance?" Howard didn't answer. His hands, suddenly clumsy, fumbled with the clasp of the envelope. He tore it open, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The first document he pulled out was a summons to the Supreme Court of the State of New York. The bold letters at the top screamed at him. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He stared at it, his mind refusing to comprehend the words. Divorce. Yasmin was divorcing him. How could she possibly know he had been so careful? His mind raced, trying to find a foothold in the crumbling reality. It had to be a bluff, a misunderstanding. But then he saw the next document. It was dozens of pages long. The motion for the temporary restraining order. He scanned the text, his eyes catching phrases that made his stomach clench. Irrefutable evidence of adultery. Significant risk of dissipation of marital assets. Commingling of funds for the purposes of extramarital activities. Attached to the back were the exhibits. Exhibit A. A copy of the flight manifest for the private jet with his name and Chloe Sterling's. Exhibit B. The reservation confirmation for the Villa Serafina. Exhibit C. A printout of his internet search history. He felt a profound, sickening sense of exposure. She knew everything. Chloe, now deeply alarmed, tried to read the papers over his shoulder. "Howard, what is going on?" He waved her away, his focus entirely on the final damning document. The judge's order. It was stamped signed. He read the operative paragraphs and the world tilted on its axis. It is hereby ordered that all personal and corporate bank accounts, brokerage accounts, and lines of credit listed in Exhibit D, held in the name of Howard Redford and/or Yasmin Vanderbilt Redford, are hereby frozen. It is further ordered that all assets of Nexus Capital LLC are hereby frozen, pending a full accounting of marital funds. Frozen. All of it. The word echoed in the sudden ringing silence of his mind. He was sitting in a $50,000 a night villa, a billionaire on paper, and he suddenly didn't have a dollar to his name. His hand trembled as he reached for the last item in the envelope. It was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery, Yasmin's stationery. He recognized her elegant, precise handwriting. He read the two short, devastating sentences. "Howard, I know about Chloe. I know about the baby. Enjoy St. Bart's. Yasmin." It was the polite, calm civility of the note that shattered him completely. It wasn't the note of a hysterical, heartbroken woman. It was the note of an executioner. Cold, final, absolute. He dropped the papers which scattered across the sun-drenched stone. He lunged for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unlock it. He tried to open his banking app. A red banner flashed across the screen. Account access restricted by court order. He tried his corporate account. The same message. He tried his personal Centurion card. He pulled up the app. Card suspended. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized him. He was trapped. Stranded in paradise with his mistress, with no access to the money that defined his entire existence. Nexus Capital, his empire was paralyzed. Payroll was due next week for thousands of employees. His deals, his reputation, everything was about to implode. Howard, Chloe's voice was sharp, panicked. She had picked up the divorce papers. She knows about the baby. What does this mean? Assets frozen? Howard didn't answer her. He was staring out at the impossibly blue sea, but he didn't see it. He saw only the calm, disappointed face of his wife. The wife he had underestimated. The wife he had dismissed as hormonal and insecure. The quiet, graceful woman who had just brought his entire world crashing down around him with nothing more than a pen and a phone call. The courier who had been watching the scene unfold with professional detachment finally spoke. "Mr. Redford, do you acknowledge receipt?" Howard slowly turned his head, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. He felt a primal scream building in his chest, a roar of fury at his own stupidity, at Yasmin's unexpected treachery. He had come to paradise to celebrate a new beginning, but he had walked directly into the meticulously planned end of his life as he knew it. And the worst part, the part that twisted in his gut like a knife, was the chilling finality of her note. Enjoy St. Bart's. It wasn't just a farewell. It was a curse. The paradise of Villa Serafina transformed into a luxurious prison cell almost instantly. The serene bubble of sun, sea, and champagne popped, leaving behind the acrid smell of panic and recrimination. Howard's first instinct, the instinct of a man used to solving every problem with his checkbook, was to fight, to call his lawyers, his bankers, his board members. He stabbed at his phone, dialing his lead attorney at Nexus Capital. The call went to voicemail. He tried his personal wealth manager at Goldman Sachs. Voicemail. He soon realized the horrifying scope of Eleanor Vance's strategy. The court order wouldn't have just gone to the banks. It would have gone to his key personnel, advising them that all communication regarding financial matters was to be directed through Vance's office. He was cut off, isolated. Chloe, her initial shock curdling into fear, watched him pace the terrace like a caged tiger. The Cartier necklace felt like a cold weight on her skin. Now no longer a trophy, but a brand. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How are we supposed to pay for this place? How are we getting home? Don't you think I'm trying to figure that out?" Howard snarled, turning on her. The charm he had cultivated was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, desperate man beneath. "This is your fault. My fault." Chloe shot back, her doe eyes flashing with anger. "You're the one who was married. You told me she was fragile, that you were going to leave her after the baby was born. You said you had it all under control." "I did have it under control," he roared. "But I underestimated her. I underestimated what she was capable of." Their argument spiraled, the beautiful fantasy of their future dissolving into a bitter blame game. All the while, the sun continued to shine and the waves continued to crash, indifferent to the implosion of their affair. Back in New York, Yasmin was the picture of calm control. She sat with Eleanor Vance in the lawyer's obsidian-walled office, monitoring the fallout. Eleanor's phone had been ringing incessantly. Panicked calls from Nexus Capital's board members, from Howard's army of financial advisors, even from the charter jet company, demanding to know how they would be paid for the return flight from St. Bart's. Eleanor handled each call with surgical precision. "Mr. Redford's assets are under a court-ordered freeze," she would state calmly. "All inquiries are to be directed to my office in writing." "No, I cannot authorize any payments at this time. He's trapped." Yasmin said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. "For now," Eleanor cautioned. "Men like your husband are cornered animals. He will get creative. He will find a line of credit call in a favor from someone off the books. Our goal wasn't to strand him forever, but to force his hand. He will have to negotiate. And when he does, he will be negotiating from a position of absolute weakness." The first twist came 2 days later. Howard, having exhausted all his official channels, made a desperate call to a man he knew from his early, hungrier days, a shadowy private equity magnate named Marcus Thorne, with a reputation for operating in the gray areas of international finance. Howard begged for a short-term, high-interest loan, just enough to get home and mount a legal defense. Marcus Thorne agreed, but the price was steep. It wasn't just interest he wanted, it was information. He wanted inside knowledge of Nexus Capital's proprietary trading algorithms, the crown jewels of Howard's empire. Cornered and desperate, Howard agreed. What Howard didn't know was that Marcus Thorne had a silent partner in his equity firm, a partner who had been feeding him information about Howard for months, waiting for the perfect moment of vulnerability to strike. That partner was Yasmin's father, Harrison Vanderbilt. Harrison, a man of immense quiet power from the world of old money, had always distrusted Howard. He saw him as a flashy, arrogant upstart who didn't deserve his daughter. When Yasmin had come to him, not for help, but simply to inform him of her plan, he had put his own chess pieces in motion. He knew Howard's type. When cornered, he would turn to someone like Thorne. Harrison's investment in Thorne's firm gave him a listening post right inside Howard's desperate plea. The call was recorded, providing Eleanor with undeniable proof that Howard was attempting to sell off corporate secrets, which were also marital assets, in direct violation of the court order. Contempt of court. Eleanor set a predatory gleam in her eye as she listened to the recording. "This is beautiful. We can use this to strip him of his control over the company entirely. We can petition the judge to appoint an independent receiver to run Nexus Capital." The second, more personal twist came from Chloe Sterling herself. After 2 days of being trapped with a furious, broke Howard, the fantasy was well and truly over. She saw the man he was without his money, volatile, selfish, and weak. Using the villa's Wi-Fi, she did something she should have done months ago. She researched Eleanor Vance, and in her research she found articles about another of Vance's famous cases, a case involving a faked pregnancy and a fraudulent claim on a wealthy industrialist. A seed of an idea began to form. Chloe contacted Eleanor Vance's office, directly requesting a secret meeting. She claimed to have information that would be invaluable to Yasmin's case. Yasmin, against Eleanor's initial advice, agreed to a video call. She needed to see the woman who had tried to destroy her life. On the screen, Chloe looked pale and diminished, the confident glow completely gone. Mrs. Redford. Yasmin. She began, her voice shaky. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I am not the monster you think I am. Howard. He lied to me. He told me your marriage was over, a loveless arrangement. He said you were emotionally unstable. And you chose to believe him. Yasmin asked, her voice like ice. I was a fool, Chloe admitted. But I'm also pregnant with his child, and now he is ruined and I am trapped. I want to help you. In exchange for consideration. What kind of consideration? Eleanor cut in, her tone sharp. A settlement, Chloe said, finding a sliver of her old confidence. A trust fund for my child. And in return, I will testify that Howard was actively planning to defraud you. That this entire Babymoon was a precursor to him hiding assets in offshore accounts under my name. I have emails. He was careless. Yasmin looked at the young woman on the screen. She saw the desperation, the calculated self-interest. It was a tempting offer. Chloe's testimony would cement their case and utterly ruin Howard, but something in Yasmin's gut told her to be cautious. Her motherly instinct was screaming. Chloe, Yasmin said, her voice softening slightly. Before we discuss any deals, I want one thing. A doctor in St. Bart's is going to come to your villa. He will perform an ultrasound. I want to see the image of my husband's child. Chloe's face froze. A flicker of pure panic shot through her eyes before she masked it. That's an invasion of my privacy. It's a condition of any negotiation, Yasmin stated flatly. No scan, no deal. You have 1 hour to agree. Yasmin ended the call. The silence in the room was thick with tension. You think she's lying? Eleanor asked. I think, Yasmin said, her hand on her own very real kicking belly, that a woman who is truly 5 months pregnant doesn't panic at the thought of an ultrasound. An hour later, the call came not from Chloe, but from a frantic Howard. Marcus Thorne had informed him that their deal was off, that Harrison Vanderbilt was involved, and that he was now facing contempt charges. He was broken. Yasmin, please, he begged, his voice cracking. I'll do anything. I'll give you whatever you want. Just call this off. You've destroyed me. You destroyed us, Howard, she replied, her voice devoid of emotion. You did this. As he continued to plead, an email dinged in Eleanor's inbox. It was from the international courier service they had used. The man who delivered the papers had submitted his final expense report. He noted that upon leaving the villa, he had passed the trash receptacle at the end of the long driveway. Sticking out of the top was the distinctive navy blue Cartier box. He had thought nothing of it, but in light of the high-profile nature of the case, decided to mention it. He also attached a photo from his phone. Eleanor opened the image and turned the screen toward Yasmin. It showed the empty Cartier box, but lying beside it in the trash was something else. A small silicone prosthetic. The kind used by actresses, or perhaps by a woman trying to convincingly fake a pregnancy bump. It was the final ugly piece of the puzzle. Chloe wasn't pregnant. She had never been pregnant. The search for obstetrics in St. Bart's wasn't for her care. It was likely Howard researching what a real 5-month pregnancy should look like. The entire affair, the baby, that was the foundation of their new life, was a complete and utter fraud, a scam designed to entrap a billionaire. And Howard, in his arrogance and ego, had fallen for it completely. Yasmin looked at the picture, then back at the city skyline. Her husband hadn't just betrayed her for another woman. He had betrayed her for a lie, a cheap, pathetic illusion. The rage and grief she had been holding back finally receded, replaced by a profound, almost pitiful sense of clarity. He wasn't a monster, he was a fool, and his empire was crumbling not because of a grand passion, but because of a grand deception he had been too blind to see. Her phone buzzed again. It was Howard calling for the 10th time. She silenced the call and looked at Eleanor. "It's over," Yasmin said. "Let's finish this." The end wasn't a fiery explosion, but the quiet, deliberate dismantling of a life. Armed with proof of Howard's attempted fraud and Chloe's deception, Yasmin held all the cards. The divorce settlement was not a negotiation, it was a surrender. Yasmin retained the Manhattan penthouse, the art collection, and a controlling interest in Nexus Capital as stipulated by the Apocalypse Clause in their prenup. She had the board install an interim CEO, a steady hand to guide the company out of the chaos Howard had created. Howard was left with a fraction of his former fortune and a reputation shattered beyond repair. Chloe Sterling vanished last heard of boarding a flight to Dubai, the fake pregnancy and Cartier necklace, her only parting gifts from a life she almost had. Months later, Yasmin stood in the nursery of the penthouse. The room was bathed in the soft afternoon light, decorated in serene shades of cream and blue. In her arms, she held her son Daniel Vanderbilt Redford. He was small, perfect, and blessedly real. He had his father's stormy eyes, but Yasmin hoped he would have her strength, her perception. She looked out at the city, no longer a cage or a battlefield, but simply a view. It was the backdrop to her new life, a life she had seized from the wreckage of a lie. She was not just a wife or a mother. She was the architect of her own future, a matriarch in the making, proving that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest survivors. Thank you for listening to this story of love, betrayal, and ultimate revenge. The story of Yasmin Redford reminds us that strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise. She turned her pain into power and rewrote her own ending. What if the perfect life you built was a lie? For one pregnant woman, the dream of a happy family shattered in an instant. Her millionaire husband, the man who vowed to love and protect her, coldly threw her out of their mansion with nothing but the clothes on her back and the baby in her womb. Can you imagine her despair? But this isn't a story about a woman broken. It's a story about a twist so shocking it will change everything you think you know about family loyalty and a mother's fierce love. Stay with us as we unravel how the very next day, the one person she least expected handed her the keys to her new life. Amelia Sterling traced the delicate embroidery on a pair of tiny cream-colored booties, a soft smile gracing her lips. At 7 months pregnant, her world had beautifully, wonderfully narrowed to this. To the gentle kicks and flutters within her, and to the love she felt for her husband, Christopher. From the bay window of their sprawling Beverly Hills mansion, the California sun cast a golden glow across the manicured lawns, making the dew on the rose bushes sparkle like a king's ransom in diamonds. It was a fairy tale, and she was its unlikely princess. She wasn't born to this world of silent electric cars charity galas that raised more money than her hometown's entire annual budget and casual conversations about summering in the Hamptons. Amelia was a librarian from Portland, a woman who found her riches in the hushed aisles of classic literature. She met Christopher Sterling during his company's tech conference in her city. He was a titan of the industry, the visionary behind Sterling Dynamics, a man whose face was a regular feature on business magazines. He was sharp-driven and possessed an intensity that could be intimidating. But with her, he had been different. He'd been charmed by her quiet wit, her passion for stories, and her complete lack of interest in his net worth. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance out of one of the novels she so dearly loved. He pursued her with a single-minded focus, flying her to Los Angeles, showering her with experiences she'd only ever dreamed of. He wasn't just buying her things. He was sharing his world, from the high-stakes pressure of his boardrooms to the quiet solitude of his private yacht off the coast of Catalina Island. He seemed to value her perspective, her calm presence in his chaotic life. When he proposed 6 months later on one knee in the middle of the rare book section of the Huntington Library, her yes was a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Their first year of marriage was idyllic. Chris was a doting husband. He'd leave her little notes tucked into her books. He'd have his private chef recreate recipes from her mother's worn-out cookbook, and he'd hold her at night, whispering his dreams for their future, for the children they would have. When she told him she was pregnant, he wept with joy. He immediately began renovations on a suite of rooms, transforming them into a state-of-the-art nursery complete with a hand-painted mural of a whimsical forest. He was going to be a father, and his excitement was palpable. A vibrant energy that filled their enormous home with warmth. The only slight friction in her perfect life was her mother-in-law, Isabella Sterling. Isabella was the matriarch of the Sterling Empire, a woman carved from New England granite and polished to a terrifyingly elegant sheen. She was a widow who had seamlessly taken the reins of her late husband's investment firm, multiplying its value with a shrewdness that was legendary. Isabella wasn't overtly cruel to Amelia. She was simply observant. Her compliments always felt like evaluations, her questions like interrogations. Amelia felt that in Isabella's cool blue eyes she would always be the librarian from Oregon, a charming but ultimately unsuitable match for the Sterling dynasty. Isabella attended their weekly family dinners, her posture perfect, her conversation precise, and always left Amelia feeling like she had just failed an unspoken test. The change in Christopher was subtle at first, a shadow creeping at the edges of their sun-drenched life. It started about 3 weeks ago. He became more withdrawn, his phone calls more frequent, and held in hushed, tense tones behind the closed door of his study. The easy laughter that Amelia cherished grew rare. He would stare into the distance, his jaw tight, his mind clearly miles away from the nursery plans or the baby names they were supposed to be discussing. When she tried to ask what was wrong, he would just shake his head, force a smile, and brush it off. "Just pressure at work, sweetheart," he'd say, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "A big acquisition, nothing for you and the little one to worry about." But Amelia knew it was more than that. She saw the way he checked the security monitors more often, the way he'd started varying his routes to and from the office. A knot of anxiety began to tighten in her chest, a premonition that something was terribly wrong. Tonight, the silence in the house was heavier than usual. Chris had been home for 2 hours but had barely said a word. He'd picked at the magnificent dinner the chef had prepared and now stood by the grand fireplace swirling a glass of amber liquid, his back to her. The fire crackled, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. "Chris," Amelia began, her voice soft, trying to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. She stood up, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly, a gesture of both protection and reassurance. "Talk to me, please. Whatever this is, we can face it together. That's what we promised." He didn't turn around. "Together." He repeated the word hollow, devoid of any meaning. He took a long swallow of his drink. "Yes, together. You, me, and our baby." She took a step closer. "I love you. Let me help you." Finally, he turned. The look on his face struck her with the force of a physical blow. The warmth, the love, the adoration she had built her life upon was gone. In its place was a chilling emptiness, a coldness so profound it made her shiver. His eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at her as if she were the center of his universe, now looked at her as if she were a stranger, a nuisance. "That's the problem, Amelia," he said, his voice flat and cruel. "The baby. This whole situation." Amelia's heart began to pound, a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. "What are you talking about? What situation?" "This," he said, gesturing vaguely around the opulent room, a gesture that seemed to encompass her, her pregnancy, their entire life together. "This isn't working for me anymore. I'm not happy." The words didn't make sense. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. "Not happy. Chris, just yesterday, you were talking about teaching our son to sail. We were happy. What has changed?" Her voice trembled, a desperate plea for an explanation for the man she knew to return. He walked over to the bar and refilled his glass, his movements deliberate, unnervingly calm. "People change, Amelia. Feelings change. The reality of this. It's not what I want. I made a mistake." A mistake. Their love, their marriage, their unborn child. A mistake. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "A mistake," she whispered the word, a shard of glass in her throat. "How can you say that?" "It's easy," he said, turning to face her fully, his expression a mask of indifference. "I want you to leave." The breath left her body in a whoosh, as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "Leave? What? What do you mean, leave? Go where, Chris? I'm 7 months pregnant with your child. I'm aware of your condition." He said the clinical phrase, a fresh stab to her heart. I'll have my lawyers arrange a settlement. You'll be well taken care of financially. You can go back to Portland, find a nice apartment. You and the baby will have everything you need. Except for me. Tears were now streaming down Amelia's face, hot, and blurring the monstrous image of her husband standing before her. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare, a horrible waking nightmare. I don't want your money, Chris. I want you. I want our family. Well, you can't have it. He snapped, his voice finally rising, laced with a venom she had never heard before. I want you out of this house. Tonight. Tonight? Her voice cracked on the word. You can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go? It's dark. I have nothing. That sounds like a personal problem, he said, his cruelty absolute. He walked past her deliberately, avoiding her gaze, and picked up the phone on the console table. I'll have one of the security guards, Martin, drive you wherever you want to go. A hotel, a friend's place. I don't care. Just get your things and be gone within the hour. He was looking at her now, his face unreadable, but his eyes were like chips of ice. There was no negotiation in them, no flicker of doubt. It was a verdict, an execution. Chris, why? She begged, her entire being consumed by a pain so vast she could barely stand. Please just tell me why. What did I do? He looked away toward the cold, dark windows. You didn't do anything, he said, his voice dropping to a low, almost guttural tone. This is just how it has to be. Now go pack. He turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor, each one a hammer blow to her shattering heart. Amelia stood frozen, the silent tears tracking paths down her cheeks, her hand protectively cradling the life inside her. The life her husband, the man she loved more than anything, had just discarded as a mistake. The fairy tale was over. The gilded cage had been flung open, and she was being cast out into the cold, unforgiving night. The hour Christopher gave her was both an eternity and a blink of an eye. Numbly, Amelia moved through the dreamlike corridors of the mansion, the place she had called home, now feeling as alien and hostile as a foreign country. She walked past the nursery, its door slightly ajar. The soft moonlight illuminated the edge of the whimsical forest mural, a prancing fawn just visible. A sob caught in her throat, so violent it felt like it would tear her apart. She quickly shut the door, unable to bear the sight of the future that had been stolen from her. In their master suite, his master suite. Now she pulled out a single suitcase. What does one pack for the end of their world? She mechanically folded a few maternity dresses, her hands trembling so badly she could barely grasp the fabric. She packed her toiletries, a book she'd been reading, and the small worn photo album of her and Chris from their first year together. In the pictures, they were radiant, their smiles genuine, their eyes full of a future that now lay in ruins. She saw the picture from the Huntington Library the moment of his proposal, and a fresh wave of grief washed over her. Was that man a lie? Had this entire year been a meticulously crafted deception? Every object in the room screamed his name. The scent of his cologne lingered in the air. His favorite armchair sat empty by the window. The weight of his betrayal was suffocating, a physical pressure on her chest that made it hard to breathe. The coldness in his eyes, the finality in his voice. It was the work of a stranger, not her husband. The Chris she knew would have fought a dragon for her. This new Chris had become the dragon himself. She zipped the suitcase, the sound echoing the finality of her departure. She took one last look around the room, a mausoleum of her dead happiness. On the nightstand next to a stack of business journals was a small silver frame. It held a picture of her taken on their honeymoon in Italy, laughing into the camera, her hair blowing in the sea breeze. For a moment, a wild, desperate hope flared in her. Maybe this was a test, a cruel, insane test of her love. Maybe he would come back through the door, his face full of remorse, and pull her into his arms. But the door remained closed. The silence of the house was absolute, broken only by her own ragged breathing. The hope died as quickly as it had come, leaving behind only the bitter ashes of reality. Martin, the head of their security detail, A stoic man with kind eyes was waiting for her in the grand foyer. He refused to meet her gaze, his discomfort a palpable thing in the cavernous space. He took her single suitcase, his touch gentle, his expression one of profound pity. It was almost worse than the anger. It confirmed her status as a victim, a pitiable creature to be escorted off the premises. "Where to, Mrs. Sterling?" Martin asked, his voice low and respectful, as if he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge the new reality. The question hung in the air. Where to? She had no one in Los Angeles. Her friends were all back in Portland. Her parents were retired and living in a small community in Arizona. Calling them in the middle of the night with this catastrophic news felt impossible, a burden too heavy to place on their peaceful lives. She couldn't bear the thought of their worry, their questions to which she had no answers. "A hotel," she finally managed to say, her voice hoarse. "Any hotel. Just away from here." The drive down the winding roads of Beverly Hills was a torturous blur. The familiar gates of their estate, the opulent homes of their neighbors, all felt like scenes from someone else's life. Martin drove in silence, the quiet hum of the luxury sedan, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. He didn't take her to a five-star hotel in Beverly Hills or Santa Monica. Whether it was his own discretion or a final cruel instruction from Christopher, she didn't know. Instead, they drove east deeper into the sprawling, anonymous heart of the city until he pulled up to a modest, clean-looking but utterly generic hotel chain. The kind of place people stayed for a night on a business trip, not where a millionaire's pregnant wife landed after being thrown out of her home. Martin carried her bag to the lobby. "Mr. Sterling has arranged for the room to be paid for a week," he said, handing her a key card. "He also instructed me to give you this." He held out a thick envelope. Amelia stared at it. "What is it?" "Cash." Martin said, his gaze fixed on a point over her shoulder. $10,000. He said, "For your immediate expenses." $10,000. A pittance to Christopher, but to him it was the price of a clean break. Blood money. The final transaction to sever their lives. She wanted to throw it back in Martin's face, to scream that she didn't want his charity, his conscience money. But the raw, pragmatic fear for her child, for their immediate future, overrode her pride. She was alone, pregnant, and penniless. She took the envelope, the paper feeling slick and ooh-eye beneath her trembling fingers. "Thank you, Martin," she whispered, though the words felt like dust in her mouth. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and turned to leave. At the door he paused and looked back at her, his professional mask slipping for just a second. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice full of genuine regret. And then he was gone. The hotel room was sterile and impersonal. A bed with a stiff patterned bedspread, a small desk, a television bolted to the wall, and a window overlooking a brightly lit parking lot. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant. After the bespoke luxury of the mansion with its fresh flowers and custom-blended air, the contrast was a physical shock. This was her new reality. A lonely, anonymous room. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the springs groaning in protest. The full weight of what had happened finally crashed down on her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last few hours evaporated, leaving behind a profound, bottomless despair. He was gone. Her husband, her love, her future. It had all been an illusion. She curled into a ball on top of the stiff bedspread, wrapping her arms around her belly, and wept. She cried for her lost love, for her broken heart, for the child who would now be born into a broken home. She cried until her body ached, and her throat was raw until there were no tears left to shed. Sometime in the pre-dawn hours, exhaustion finally claimed her. She fell into a fitful, dream-haunted sleep. She dreamed of Christopher, the loving version of him, smiling at her, holding her hand. But when she reached for him, he dissolved into smoke, his laughter turning into the cold, cruel words he'd spoken by the fireplace. She woke with a start, her heart pounding, the phantom pain as real as the lumpy mattress beneath her. The first light of dawn was beginning to seep through the thin curtains. A new day. For Amelia, it felt like the first day of a life sentence. She lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling, a single question echoing in the desolate silence of her mind. Why the reason he had given that he was simply not happy was too flimsy, too absurd. It didn't align with the man she knew, the man who had meticulously planned their future. There had to be something else, a darker, deeper reason for this sudden surgical cruelty. But what could it be? Had he found someone else? Was he in some kind of trouble? The lack of answers was a form of torture, leaving her to endlessly cycle through 1,000 horrifying possibilities, each one more painful than the last. She was adrift in a sea of confusion and pain, with no land in sight. The first 24 hours in the anonymous hotel room were a descent into a specific kind of hell. It wasn't a place of fire and brimstone, but one of beige walls, stale air, and a profound soul-crushing silence. Amelia existed in a limbo of grief. Time lost its structure, marked only by the shifting light that filtered through the thin, grimy curtains. The harsh glare of midday giving way to the lonely, neon-tinged gloom of night, and then the gray, hopeless light of dawn. The room itself was an insult. The bedspread was stiff and scratchy against her tear-sensitive skin. The air conditioner hummed a relentless, monotonous tune that grated on her raw nerves. Every detail, from the water ring on the cheap wooden nightstand to the bolted-down television, was a testament to her new status. She was transient, temporary, and utterly alone. She was a librarian, a woman whose life had been shaped by narratives. Now she was trapped in a story where the plot had taken a sudden, inexplicable, and cruel turn. She endlessly replayed the final scene, with Christopher dissecting every word, every gesture, searching for a clue she had missed. His eyes, once her haven, had been cold, empty portals. His voice, which had once whispered promises of forever, had sliced her apart with clinical precision. This isn't working for me anymore. I made a mistake. The words echoed in the silent room, each repetition a fresh stab of pain. Had she been that blind? Had the entire love affair, the marriage, the joyous conception of their child, all been a grand performance on his part? The thought was a poison seeping into every happy memory she possessed, tainting it, turning it into a lie. Her phone became both a lifeline and an instrument of torture. Several times, with a trembling hand and a heart full of desperate, stupid hope, she called Christopher's number. The first few attempts, the familiar ringing tone felt like a possibility, a slim chance that he would pick up and say it was all a horrible misunderstanding. But each time it clicked over to his voicemail, and his warm, confident voice, "You've reached Chris Sterling, leave a message," felt like a cruel joke from a ghost. She never left a message. What could she say? By evening, the ringing stopped. Her calls went directly to the recorded, impersonal voice of the service provider. He had blocked her. The finality of that act was absolute. He hadn't just closed the door. He had bricked it up from his side, ensuring she could never reach him again. The realization brought on a fresh wave of weeping, a storm of grief so violent she had to curl into a ball on the lumpy bed, clutching her belly as if to shield her child from the tidal wave of her own despair. But as the second day dawned, something began to shift. Amidst the depths of her sorrow, she felt a familiar flutter from within. A tiny, insistent kick against her side. It was a message from another world, a reminder of the life that was depending on her, a life that knew nothing of betrayal or heartbreak. It only knew her. In that moment, a flicker of a different emotion ignited through the fog of her grief-anger. Not the helpless, weeping anger of a victim, but the fierce, protective fury of a mother. She would not let her child be born into this pit of despair. She would not let Christopher's cruelty define their future. She was more than just his discarded wife. She was Amelia, and she was a mother. The tears stopped. She pushed herself off the bed, her movements stiff but purposeful. She went into the bathroom, splashed cold water on her swollen face, and looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a wreck, but behind the puffy eyes there was a glint of steel she hadn't seen before. A plan began to form, hazy at first, but a plan nonetheless. Portland. She would go back. She would use the blood money Chris had given her to find a small apartment, get a job, and build a life, a safe and loving life for her and her baby. It would be hard and it would be lonely, but it would be hers. She was just mentally composing a text to a realtor friend back home when a knock sounded on the hotel room door. It wasn't the timid tap of housekeeping. It was sharp, decisive, and authoritative. Instantly, the carefully constructed wall of her resolve crumbled, and that wild, foolish hope surged back with dizzying force. Chris. It had to be. He'd had time to think. The anger had worn off, and he'd realized the insanity of what he'd done. He had tracked her down. He had come to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to take them home. Her heart hammering against her ribs, she rushed to the door, her hands fumbling with the chain lock and the deadbolt. She pulled it open, her face already softening, her lips forming his name, ready to collapse into the embrace she so desperately craved. But the figure standing in the drab, poorly lit hallway was not her husband. It was Isabella Sterling. She was an apparition from another universe, dressed in a flawlessly tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Amelia's entire wardrobe. Her silver hair coiled into a perfect chignon, a diamond brooch glittering like a shard of ice on her lapel. She looked completely, utterly out of place, a creature of immense power and wealth surveying a scene of squalor. Her cool, appraising eyes swept over Amelia's tear-ravaged face, her simple maternity dress, and the depressing room behind her, and her lips thinned in an expression of profound disapproval. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. The hope vanished, replaced by a cold, stomach-churning dread. This was the final act of her humiliation. Isabella, the icy matriarch who had always seen her as unworthy, had come to deliver the coup de grace. To serve the divorce papers personally, perhaps. To make it unequivocally clear with her signature chilling poise that the Sterling family was washing its hands of the little librarian and her inconvenient baby. Isabella. Amelia breathed the name barely audible. She took an involuntary step back, her hand flying to her belly in a protective gesture that was now second nature. "This is even more dreary than I imagined," Isabella said, her voice as crisp and cool as a winter morning. Her gaze flickered around the room. He always did lack imagination in his cruelty. She met Amelia's eyes. "May I come in?" It was phrased as a question but delivered as an edict. Wordlessly, Amelia stepped aside. Isabella swept into the room, bringing with her the faint, expensive scent of Chanel No. 5, a fragrance that instantly overpowered the room's cheap disinfectant smell. She placed her pristine leather handbag on the scarred desk, a stark contrast of textures. She stood in the center of the small space, the undisputed center of gravity, and turned to face Amelia. Amelia braced herself, waiting for the inevitable condescending lecture, but the words that came out of Isabella's mouth were not the ones she expected. "My son," Isabella stated, her voice devoid of any warmth but filled with a strange, weary certainty, "is a brilliant, powerful, and monumental fool." Amelia could only stare, her mind struggling to process the statement. It was so contrary to anything she had ever heard from her mother-in-law that it felt like a line from a different play. "I am sure," Isabella continued, her sharp eyes softening for a fraction of a second as they glanced at Amelia's stomach, "that you are confused. I am sure that you believe Christopher is a monster. He has certainly given you every reason to." A flicker of Amelia's own anger returned. "He threw me out," she said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "He told me that our child was the biggest mistake of his life. He looked at me like I was nothing. What else am I supposed to think?" "You are supposed to think," Isabella countered, stepping closer, "that you married a man so terrified of losing you that he chose to detonate his own life, believing the blast would shield you from a greater threat. He is an arrogant man, Amelia. He believed he had the right to break your heart in order to save it. A foolish, masculine, and utterly infuriating piece of logic." Isabella turned back to her handbag and retrieved a slim, dark gray tablet. "Christopher lied to you," she said, her voice now low and serious. "He didn't stop loving you. In fact, he did this precisely because he loves you. He did this because he is being hunted, and he believes that by cutting you loose, the hunter will no longer see you as bait. Her head swimming, Amelia sank onto the edge of the lumpy bed. Hunted? What are you talking about? A threat. A ghost from his past, Isabella said grimly. She unlocked the tablet. Do you recall the name Damien Thornfield? The name sent a faint chill down Amelia's spine. She remembered it from a passing conversation years ago. The man from that hostile takeover, the one who went to prison. The very same, Isabella confirmed. Thornfield was not just a business rival. He was a sociopath who wore a CEO's suit. Christopher didn't just outmaneuver him. He exposed him for fraud, blackmail, and extortion that went far beyond the boardroom. Christopher was the primary witness who ensured he was locked away. Thornfield swore revenge, not on the company, on Christopher personally. Isabella's face was grim. He was released from a federal penitentiary 3.5 weeks ago, and he has made it his life's mission to dismantle Christopher's world piece by precious piece. She turned the tablet so Amelia could see the screen. It displayed what looked like a secured email. The text was cold, precise, and terrifying. Sterling. You took my world. Now I will take yours. Not your company. That's just bricks and mortar. I'll take what you love. I've seen your new life. The pretty wife, the little librarian. I hear there's a baby on the way. A legacy. It would be a tragedy if something were to happen to her. If she were to have an accident. I'll be watching. Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. Her blood ran cold. Below the text was a photograph. It was her. She was leaving a bookstore in Larchmont Village just a few days ago, smiling, a hand resting on her belly. The photo was taken from across the street, a telephoto shot, invasive and predatory. She had been stalked, cataloged, and threatened. This arrived at Christopher's private email 3 weeks ago. Isabella explained softly, seeing the color drain from Amelia's face. He's been living in a private hell ever since. He hired round-the-clock covert security for you, but Thornfield is slippery, a master of staying in the shadows. Chris became consumed by the idea that as long as you were publicly attached to him, you were a walking target. So he devised this plan. The pieces of the last few weeks slammed into place with dizzying, sickening clarity. The withdrawn silences, the hushed phone calls, the new obsession with security protocols, the haunted look in his eyes. It wasn't a lack of love. It was an overdose of fear. He intended to create a public, brutal, and undeniable separation. Isabella continued, her voice laced with exasperation for her son's methods. He believed if Thornfield thought you were discarded, worthless to him, you would cease to be a target. He planned to support you from afar anonymously until the threat was neutralized. It was a cold equation, Amelia. A business decision applied to a human heart. It was stupid, it was cruel, but it was born out of a desperate, terrified love. Amelia looked from the terrifying image on the tablet to Isabella's resolute face. The intimidating matriarch was gone. In her place was a mother fiercely angry at her son's foolishness and fiercely protective of her family. A man is not his best self when he is ruled by fear, Isabella said, her gaze unwavering. He should have trusted you with the truth. He should have trusted in your shared strength. He failed you not by ceasing to love you, but by failing to respect you. And that is a failure I will not permit to stand. She reached into her handbag again and produced a single heavy key on a simple, elegant silver fob. It was the key to the front door of the mansion. She held it out to Amelia. Christopher may pay the mortgage, but the land that house sits on was bought by my grandfather. It is Sterling land, and I, as the head of this family, say who belongs on it. Isabella declared, her voice ringing with an iron authority. A family does not scatter in the face of a threat. It closes ranks, it fortifies its walls, and it fights. You, Amelia, are carrying my grandchild. You are the future of this family. Your place is not in this transient hellhole. It is at home. Amelia stared at the key, then back at Isabella's face. In a world that had been turned completely upside down, the most unexpected person had just become her anchor, her champion. "Take the key," Isabella commanded, a new warmth creeping into her tone. "Pack your bag. You are going home. First we will confront my foolish son, and then, as a family, we will go to war." The journey back to Beverly Hills was a passage from one reality to another. The Bentley moved with a silent, insulated grace through the chaotic tapestry of Los Angeles traffic, a bubble of immense privilege and power. Less than 48 hours ago, Amelia had traversed these same streets in the opposite direction, a nameless, heartbroken refugee in the back of a security car. Now she was returning not as a supplicant, but as a queen being escorted to her fortress. The heavy ornate key Isabella had given her felt cool and solid in her palm, an anchor in the swirling sea of her emotions. It wasn't just metal. It was validation, a symbol of her rightful place, a weapon against the phantom she had become in her own life. Beside her, Isabella Sterling sat ramrod straight, a portrait of serene command. She gazed out the window, but Amelia knew her attention was entirely focused on the younger woman beside her. "He will not make this easy," Isabella said, her voice cutting through the car's quiet hum. It wasn't a warning, it was a strategic assessment. When Christopher is cornered by fear, his first and most trusted weapon is anger. He will lash out. He will try to make you feel small, foolish, and reckless for having returned. He will try to reassert the control he believes he has lost. Amelia turned to look at her mother-in-law, the woman who had transformed from a chilling enigma into an unexpected savior. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "You do not engage his anger with anger of your own," Isabella advised, finally turning her piercing blue eyes on Amelia. "And you do not meet it with tears, at least not at first. He will see both as weakness, as predictable female hysterics. He is a man of logic, Amelia. He has built an entire fortress of misguided logic around this decision. You must dismantle it brick by brick with the one thing his logic cannot defend against the emotional truth of the damage he has caused." Isabella paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Remind him of his own words. Remind him of the pain. Do not allow him to hide behind the noble excuse of protection. Make him see the face of the man he became in that living room. He is terrified of Damien Thornfield, yes. But he should be more terrified of becoming a man who could so surgically destroy the woman he loves. That is the only thing that will reach him. As they glided through the opulent tree-lined streets of the neighborhood, the familiar sight of manicured hedges and palatial homes no longer felt like a fairy tale. It felt like a battlefield, beautiful and deceptive. The Bentley slowed and turned into their private driveway, the grand mansion rising before them, its windows dark and imposing. The chauffeur brought the car to a silent stop before the main entrance. Isabella did not move to get out. "This is as far as I go," she said. "This is a battle between a husband and a wife. I have armed you and brought you to the gates. The rest you must do alone." She offered a small, rare smile. "Remember, you are the mother of a Sterling. We do not crumble. We endure. We win." Amelia nodded, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She drew a deep breath, squeezed the key in her hand one last time, and stepped out of the car. The evening air was cool and smelled of night-blooming jasmine. She walked up the stone steps, each footfall a declaration of her return. Without hesitation, she slid the key into the heavy oak door. The lock turned with a satisfying, resonant click. The door swung open into the immense silent darkness of the foyer. Home. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, plunging herself into the familiar gloom. For a moment she just stood there, letting her senses adjust. The air carried the faint bespoke scent of the house, a mix of lemon, verbena, old books, and the subtle fragrance of the fresh lilies that were always in the entryway. But tonight, underneath it all, she could smell the ghost of her own despair, the lingering chill of betrayal. She didn't turn on the lights. She moved through the cavernous ground floor like a phantom, her hands grazing the surfaces of familiar objects. The polished wood of a credenza, the cool marble of a statue, the rough silk of the living room curtains. This was the room, the scene of the crime. She could almost see them, two specters locked in a tableau of cruelty and shock. His cold, indifferent face, her own dissolving in tears. A shiver racked her body, but she pushed the memory down. It was fuel now, not poison. She settled into an armchair opposite the one he favored, the one he'd collapsed into just before delivering his final brutal verdict. She sat in the darkness, a sentinel waiting for the return of a king who had abdicated his throne. The house was utterly silent, a vacuum amplifying the frantic beating of her own heart and the gentle, reassuring flutter of the life inside her. She placed a hand on her belly. "We're in this together," she thought, a silent promise to her child. "I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting for your father." Hours crawled by. With every distant sound, a car passing on the street, the sighing of the wind, her nerves screamed. She fought to remain calm, to hold on to the cold, clear resolve Isabella had instilled in her. Finally, just after 10 p.m., she heard it. The low, familiar growl of his sports car coming up the driveway. The engine cut, followed by the soft crunch of tires on gravel. A car door slammed. Her breath hitched. Then the sound of a key in the lock, the same sound she had made hours before. The front door opened and closed with a heavy thud. She heard his weary footsteps on the marble floor of the foyer, the tired sigh he let out as he dropped his keys into a silver bowl. He was walking towards the living room, likely on his way to the bar to pour the drink he so clearly needed. He walked in, and for a full 5 seconds, he didn't see her in the shadows. He moved towards the decanters, his shoulders slumped, the very picture of exhaustion. Then a flicker of movement, perhaps her own involuntary breath, made him freeze. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes found her. Christopher Sterling stopped dead, his body going rigid. In the dim light filtering in from the moonlit gardens, she saw his face cycle through a series of expressions with terrifying speed. First, utter slack-jawed disbelief, as if his mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Second, a flash of wild, impossible hope, so raw and vulnerable it almost broke her heart. And third, as his brain caught up, that hope was violently extinguished and replaced by sheer, undiluted panic, which quickly hardened into a mask of cold, protective fury. "What in God's name are you doing here?" He snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was meant to intimidate, to dominate. "How did you get in? Was it Martin? I swear to God, I'll have him fired and blacklisted so fast he'll never work in this town again." Amelia remained seated, her stillness a stark contrast to his explosive energy. She let his threats hang in the air and die. "Leave Martin alone," she said, her voice shockingly calm and clear in the tense silence. "He had nothing to do with it." "Then who?" he demanded, taking a menacing step forward. "Who let you in here? You're not supposed to be here. It's not safe." "Your mother gave me a key," Amelia stated simply, letting the words land. "And she gave me the truth, Christopher. The whole truth." The name Damien Thornfield was an unspoken thunderclap in the room. His anger, so potent a moment before, seemed to stutter. The momentum went out of him, and he stared at her, his face a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The fury was still there, but now it was laced with the frustration of a failed plan and the terror of discovery. "She had no right," he finally choked out, his voice hoarse. "This was my responsibility, my burden to carry. She had no idea what she's done. She's put you directly in the path of a monster." This was it, the moment Isabella had prepared her for. Amelia rose slowly from the armchair, a queen ascending her throne, and faced him across the expensive Persian rug that had become their no-man's land. "No, Chris," she said, her voice gaining strength. "She did what you were too proud and too terrified to do. She treated me like your wife, and you are the one who put me in the path of a monster, not Thornfield, you, right here in this room." "That's insane!" He shot back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Everything I did, every horrible word, it was all to save you. To get you out of the line of fire, I was trying to protect you. Protect me." Her laugh was a sharp, brittle sound devoid of humor. "Don't you dare use that word. You didn't protect me. You eviscerated me. You took a scalpel to my heart and carved out every bit of happiness and security I had. Do you have any idea what the last 2 days have been like? Do you—" She took a step toward him, her eyes blazing. "You made me believe that our love was a sham. You called our child Chris, a situation, a mistake. You threw me out into the night with a wad of cash like I was some inconvenient affair you were finally ending. That isn't protection. That's a calculated act of psychological warfare. You were so consumed with saving my life that you didn't give a damn about destroying my spirit." "You don't understand the danger," he yelled, his voice cracking under the strain. "Thornfield isn't some corporate shark. He's unhinged. The things he did, the things he's capable of. I've been living in a cold sweat for weeks imagining him getting his hands on you. I chose to hurt you myself because the pain I could inflict was nothing compared to what he would do." "And that was your decision to make," she countered, her voice dropping to a low, intense level. "You, the great Christopher Sterling, got to weigh the options and decide which form of torture your pregnant wife should endure, without consulting her, without giving her the choice. You didn't just underestimate him, Chris. You underestimated me. You looked at me, and you didn't see a partner. You didn't see a fighter. You saw a liability, a fragile object that needed to be hidden away." The truth of her words struck him with visible force. He flinched as if she had physically slapped him. The anger was gone now, replaced by a dawning, horrifying understanding of his own actions reflected in her eyes. "I knelt on the floor of a cheap hotel room," she continued, her voice trembling as the memory washed over her. "And I begged to God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore to tell me what I did wrong. I held our baby and I apologized to him for failing, for not being enough to keep his father's love. That is the reality you created, not protection, desolation." He finally broke. The rigid, powerful facade of the CEO, the tycoon, the protector crumbled into dust. He stumbled backwards and sank into his armchair, the one he had stood so proudly beside 2 nights ago. He buried his face in his hands and a sob tore through his body, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. "I'm sorry." He wept, the words muffled by his hands. "Oh God, Amelia, I'm so sorry. I was so scared. I didn't know what else to do. I was alone." "No," she whispered, walking over to him until she stood directly before his collapsed form. "You weren't. You were never alone. You just chose to be." She knelt before him just as she had imagined doing in her darkest moments of grief, but this time it was not in supplication. It was an act of grace. She gently took his wrists and pulled his hands away from his tear-ravaged face. He looked up at her, his eyes red and pleading. The eyes of the man she had married finally returned to her. "From now on," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable, "there are no more unilateral decisions, no more secrets, no more lies. Whatever this is, whatever comes for us, we face it, together." He nodded, a wave of shuddering relief passing through him. He reached out a trembling hand and cradled her face, his thumb stroking the curve of her cheek. "Together," he echoed the single word, not an ending, but the beginning of a long and difficult reclamation. The wound between them was deep and festering. The threat outside their walls was still very real. But for the first time in weeks, the king of the castle had understood that his greatest strength was not in his walls or his wealth, but in the queen he had so foolishly tried to cast away. In the end, it wasn't Christopher's millions or his power that saved his family. It was the shocking, fierce loyalty of his mother and the incredible strength of his wife. They faced the threat together, a united front built on a newly forged, unbreakable trust. The road to healing was long, but their love, tested by the cruelest of circumstances, proved to be real. This story shows us that sometimes the greatest acts of love can be terribly misguided, and true strength isn't found in facing our fears alone, but in having the courage to trust the people who stand beside us. What did you think of Christopher's drastic plan? Was he right to try and protect his family that way, or was his cruelty unforgivable? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. They say for better or for worse in sickness and in health. For Lillian Hayes, in sickness meant a sterile white room, the rhythmic pulse of machines her only companion. She believed her husband, the magnate Anthony Hayes, was continents away, closing a deal that would add another zero to their already staggering fortune. She pictured him in boardrooms, his charismatic presence commanding respect. But Anthony was much closer to home. And while Lillian fought for her life, another woman was living hers in Lillian's house, sleeping in her bed, and rearranging the memories of a lifetime, completely unaware that the true queen of the castle was not only alive, but held the key to the kingdom in a way no one could ever imagine. The scent of antiseptic clung to everything in room 312 of the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. It was a smell Lillian had come to associate with survival, a sterile perfume that masked the cloying sweetness of the lilies Anthony sent every other day. They were always white, always perfect, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of the life she'd put on hold. For 3 long months, this pristine, unnervingly quiet room had been her world. A rare and aggressive form of pneumonia had ambushed her, leaving her tethered to a web of tubes and monitors, her breath a shallow, hard-won victory. Her husband, Anthony Hayes, was a man whose name was synonymous with success. A real estate mogul who had sculpted the Los Angeles skyline, he was a figure of immense power and charisma. His photograph, a dashing black-and-white portrait from their early years, sat on her bedside table. In it, his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a promise of forever. He called every day his voice a smooth baritone that traveled across continents, or so she thought. He was in Singapore, he'd said, finalizing the deal of a lifetime. A multi-billion-dollar hotel and residence project that would be the crown jewel of his empire. "I miss you, my love," he'd murmur, his voice laced with a convincing blend of longing and regret. "Every second is an eternity. But this is for us, for our future." Lillian would close her eyes and picture him in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Marina Bay Sands, his bespoke Tom Ford suit immaculate, his presence commanding. She'd imagine him returning to a lonely suite at the Fullerton Bay Hotel, the city lights twinkling below a pale imitation of the stars they used to watch from the observatory at their Bel Air estate. She never once doubted him. Theirs was a love story whispered about in the elite circles of Los Angeles. Anthony, the self-made billionaire, and Lillian, the brilliant architect who had been his partner in every sense of the word. They had met at a charity gala, a whirlwind of champagne and polite conversation. He had been captivated by her sharp wit, and the way her eyes, a warm, intelligent brown, seemed to see right through the facade of wealth and power that surrounded him. Their life together was a tapestry woven with threads of gold and silver. Their Bel Air mansion, a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa nestled in the hills, was a testament to their shared taste and success. It was a house Lillian had poured her heart into, not just as a resident but as a designer. She had worked alongside the renowned architect Harrison Sinclair to create a space that was both opulent and intimate, a sanctuary from the relentless demands of their public lives. The house on Bellagio Road was more than just a property. It was a living, breathing entity, each room a chapter of their story. The grand library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves housed first editions of her favorite classics and his collection of antique maps. The master bedroom with its panoramic views of the city was where they had dreamed up their future, their whispers mingling with the distant hum of Los Angeles. But now, as Lillian lay in her hospital bed, the silence of her gilded cage was deafening. Her recovery was slow, a painstaking process of rebuilding her strength one breath at a time. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but the road ahead was long. She missed the feel of the cool marble beneath her feet, the scent of the jasmine that climbed the walls of their garden, the familiar weight of Anthony's arm around her as they watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. She had no idea that while she was fighting for every breath, another woman was breathing in the air of her home, her scent slowly, insidiously replacing Lillian's. Her name was Sienna, a name as vibrant and fiery as the woman herself. She was an aspiring actress, a supernova of ambition and beauty who had caught Anthony's eye at a dimly lit bar in West Hollywood. To Sienna, Anthony was a godsend. He was her ticket out of a cramped walk-up apartment in Koreatown and into a world she had only ever seen in magazines. He had swept her off her feet with a whirlwind of lavish dinners at Spago Beverly Hills, impromptu trips to Napa Valley in his private jet, and gifts that left her breathless. A classic Chanel 255 handbag, a diamond necklace from Harry Winston, a vintage Rolex that had once belonged to a Hollywood legend. Anthony had been careful at first. Their affair was a clandestine dance of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. But as Lillian's hospital stay stretched from weeks into months, his caution began to fray at the edges. The lie of his Singapore trip had become a convenient shroud, a cloak of invisibility that allowed him to live a double life. One evening, after a particularly intoxicating dinner fueled by vintage Bordeaux and the heady thrill of their illicit romance, Anthony made a reckless decision. Sienna had been complaining about her apartment, the noisy neighbors, the plumbing that seemed to have a mind of its own. "I can't bear the thought of you in that place," Anthony had said, his voice a low, seductive rumble. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "My house. It's empty. Just sitting there. I'm in Singapore after all." He'd smiled a slow, deliberate smile that made her heart race. "Why don't you stay there, just for a little while? Until I get back?" Sienna's eyes had widened. The Bel Air mansion, the one she had only ever seen in the glossy pages of Architectural Digest, it was a fantasy, a dream she had never dared to entertain. "But your wife?" She had stammered, a flicker of apprehension in her emerald eyes. Anthony had waved a dismissive hand. "She's away, visiting her sister on the East Coast. An extended trip. The house is empty, I promise." It was a lie, of course, a new layer added to the elaborate fiction he had constructed. He had justified it to himself, a temporary solution to a temporary problem. Lillian would never have to know. And so Sienna had moved in. She had arrived at the imposing gates of the Bellagio Road estate in a taxi, her few belongings packed into 2 oversized suitcases. The housekeeper, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Gable, who had been with the Hayes family for decades, had greeted her with a look of thinly veiled disapproval. But Anthony's instructions had been clear. Miss Dubois was to be treated as a guest with all the courtesies that entailed. The house was even more breathtaking than Sienna had imagined. It was a palace, a labyrinth of marble floors, soaring ceilings, and priceless art. She had wandered through the rooms in a daze, her fingers trailing over the cool, smooth surfaces of the custom-made furniture. She had twirled in the center of the grand ballroom, her laughter echoing in the vast, empty space. She had made her way to the master suite, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was Lillian's room. Lillian's bed. She had hesitated for a moment, a pang of guilt, sharp and unwelcome, piercing through her euphoria. But then she had pushed it aside, the intoxicating scent of Anthony's cologne lingering in the air, a potent aphrodisiac. She had opened the walk-in closet, a room the size of her entire apartment, and gasped. Rows upon rows of designer clothes, a rainbow of silks and cashmeres hung in pristine order. Shoes, hundreds of them, were displayed like works of art. Handbags from every luxury brand imaginable lined the shelves. It was a treasure trove, a fashionista's paradise. And as Sienna slipped into one of Lillian's silk robes, its fabric cool and sensual against her skin, she felt a sense of ownership, a thrilling, audacious belief that this was where she belonged. She was no longer the struggling actress from Koreatown. She was the mistress of a Bel Air mansion, the woman of a millionaire's dreams. She had no idea that the woman whose life she was so casually inhabiting was just a few miles away, fighting for her own. And she had no idea that the deed to this magnificent house, the very foundation of her newfound fantasy, held a secret that would shatter her world and Anthony's in a way neither of them could ever have foreseen. The name on the deed was not Anthony Hayes. It was Lillian's and Lillian's alone. A secret she had kept, a trump card she had never intended to play. But the game, as she was about to discover, had changed, and the rules were about to be rewritten. The first sign that something was amiss came not from a dramatic confession or a slip of the tongue, but from a mundane detail, a single out-of-place thread in the carefully woven tapestry of Anthony's deceit. It was a charge on his American Express Centurion card statement, a card Lillian had access to, a detail Anthony in his arrogance had overlooked. Lillian was finally on the mend. The doctors had been amazed by her resilience, the fierce tenacity with which she had clung to life. She was still weak, her body a pale shadow of its former self, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She was sitting up in her hospital bed, a laptop perched on her knees, catching up on the minutiae of a life that had been on pause. She was scrolling through their joint account, a habit born of years of managing their shared finances, when she saw it. A charge from a small, exclusive floral boutique in Beverly Hills called Le Jardin Privé. It wasn't the amount that caught her attention, a mere few $100s a drop in the ocean of their expenditure. It was the name. Anthony knew she was allergic to the particular type of orchid that was the boutique's specialty. He had made that mistake once early in their relationship, and the memory of her swollen eyes and hives had been seared into his memory. He would never buy her flowers from there. A small, cold knot of unease began to form in the pit of her stomach. She tried to dismiss it, a simple mistake, perhaps an assistant's error. But the unease lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of her mind. She clicked on the transaction details, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. The delivery address was not the hospital. It was their home, on Bellagio Road. The room suddenly felt colder, the rhythmic beep of the monitor a frantic, insistent pulse. Why would he send flowers to an empty house? Unless it wasn't empty. The thought, once it had taken root, began to grow, its tendrils wrapping around her heart, squeezing the air from her lungs. She remembered a conversation from a few weeks ago, a strained, stilted call with Mrs. Gable. Lillian had called to check on the house, and the housekeeper had been uncharacteristically evasive. "Is everything all right, Martha?" Lillian had asked, a note of concern in her voice. There had been a long pause on the other end of the line. "Everything is fine, Mrs. Hayes. Just as you left it." But her voice had been tight, her words clipped. At the time, Lillian had attributed it to the housekeeper's general stoicism, her dislike of small talk. But now, in the harsh light of this new, unsettling discovery, the conversation took on a sinister new meaning. Lillian's hands trembled as she typed in the name of the boutique, her search engine pulling up its Instagram page. Her breath hitched in her throat. There on the boutique's feed was a photograph of a stunning, ostentatious arrangement of the very orchids she was allergic to. The caption read, "A special delivery for a special lady. Welcome to the neighborhood, Sienna." The post was tagged with a location, Bel Air. Sienna. The name was a shard of glass in her heart. She didn't know who this woman was, but she knew with a chilling, gut-wrenching certainty what she was. The mistress, his mistress, in her house. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the sterile white walls of the hospital room closing in on her. The betrayal was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left her gasping for air. The image of Anthony, the man she loved, the man she had built a life with, shattered into a million pieces. The man who had called her every day, his voice thick with a feigned longing, had been lying to her. Every word a carefully crafted deception. Her grief was a tidal wave, a raw, primal force that threatened to consume her. But then something else rose to the surface. Something harder, colder, and far more dangerous. Rage. A slow-burning fury that solidified the shattered pieces of her heart into a weapon. She had to see for herself. She had to know. That afternoon, against the frantic protests of her doctors and nurses, Lillian Hayes discharged herself from the hospital. She was still fragile, her body a battlefield of her recent illness, but her resolve was forged in steel. She called her most trusted confidant, her lawyer and friend, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Reed. "I need a favor, Evelyn." Lillian said, her voice low and steady, betraying none of the turmoil that raged within her. "And I need you to ask no questions." An hour later, a discreet black town car pulled up to a side entrance of the hospital. Lillian, dressed in a simple but elegant Chanel tracksuit, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering light, slipped into the back seat. The drive to Bel Air was a blur. The familiar streets, once a source of comfort and nostalgia, now seemed alien, tinged with the bitter taste of betrayal. As they turned onto Bellagio Road, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread and anticipation. She had Evelyn instruct the driver to park a little way down the street, hidden from view by a thicket of bougainvillea. From her vantage point, she could see the front of her house, her beautiful, sprawling villa, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon sun. And then she saw her. Sienna. She was lounging by the pool, a vision of youthful, sun-kissed perfection. She was wearing one of Lillian's bikinis, a vibrant heiress creation that Lillian had bought for a trip to St. Bart's they had never taken. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her emerald eyes sparkling. And beside her on a sun lounger was Anthony. He was not in Singapore. He was here in their home with this woman. He was leaning towards her, his expression one of rapt adoration, the same look he used to give Lillian. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of her fiery red hair behind her ear, his touch lingering and intimate. The scene was a knife in Lillian's heart, twisting and turning, each movement a fresh wave of agony. She watched, her breath held tight in her chest as Anthony leaned in and kissed Sienna, a long, languid kiss that spoke of a deep and familiar intimacy. In that moment, something inside Lillian broke. The love, the trust, the shared history, all of it dissolved into a bitter, corrosive acid. The woman who had been fighting for her life in a hospital bed was gone. In her place was a woman who was fighting for something else entirely: justice. Revenge. She turned to Evelyn, her face a mask of cold, controlled fury. "The house," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The deed. Is it still in my name? And my name alone?" Evelyn, who had been watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and professional detachment, nodded. "Yes, Lillian. The house is yours. It was a premarital asset, and we made sure it was ironclad. Anthony has no legal claim to it whatsoever." A slow, chilling smile spread across Lillian's face. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that promised a reckoning. "Good," she said, her voice regaining its strength, its authority. "Because I want them out. Both of them. And I want to be the one to do it." The plan was simple, elegant, and ruthless. It was a plan born of a broken heart and a brilliant mind. A plan that would dismantle Anthony's carefully constructed world piece by piece. She would not storm in a screaming, hysterical wife. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She would play the long game. She would let him believe he was in control, that his secrets were safe. She instructed Evelyn to draw up the necessary paperwork, a formal eviction notice. It was a cold legal document devoid of emotion, a stark black and white declaration of her ownership and her intent. And then she waited. She returned to the hospital, a meek, compliant patient once more, the fury in her eyes carefully concealed behind a mask of weary resignation. She took Anthony's calls, her voice soft and placid, betraying none of the storm that raged within her. "I miss you," he would say, his voice a silken lie. "I miss you too," she would reply, the words like ash in her mouth. She was biding her time, gathering her strength, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The queen was about to retake her castle. And the usurpers, basking in the warmth of their stolen paradise, had no idea that a storm was coming, a storm that would wash them away, leaving nothing but the wreckage of their lies in its wake. The day Lillian chose for her return was a Tuesday, a day of bland, unassuming normalcy, utterly devoid of the high drama it was about to host. For 2 weeks she had been a ghost haunting the sterile corridors of Cedar Sinai, her body healing while her mind sharpened into a razor's edge. Each day she played the part of the compliant patient, her fragility a masterful disguise for the cold, calculating fury that was coalescing in her soul. Each night she meticulously planned her reclamation not as a spurned wife, but as a sovereign ruler preparing to quell a rebellion. When she was discharged that morning, the doctors praised her remarkable resilience. They saw a woman frail from illness, but her eyes, which they mistook as weary, held the glint of forged steel. She didn't call for a discreet town car or a taxi. Instead, she had her personal Bentley, a formidable silver ghost, delivered to the hospital's private exit. Sliding behind the wheel, the familiar scent of worn leather and her own subtle perfume was the first act of taking back her life. The engine purred to life with a low, predatory growl, a sound that resonated with the awakening power inside her. The drive to Bel Air was a surreal journey through a life that was no longer hers. The sun-drenched boulevards, the towering palms, the familiar gates of a world she had once commanded, it all felt alien-tainted. As she turned onto Bellagio Road, her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This wasn't a homecoming. It was an invasion. She didn't announce her arrival. She didn't sweep up the grand driveway to the main entrance. Instead, she parked on a quiet side street and entered through the garden gate using her own key. The click of the lock was a small, satisfying sound, the first note in her symphony of retribution. The silence that greeted her inside was the most unnerving thing of all. It was a dead quiet, the natural hum of the house stifled. The air, which should have carried the clean, subtle scent of the Joe Malone lime basil and mandarin candles she favored, was thick with a foreign perfume, a cloying, overly sweet floral that seemed to cling to the velvet drapes and seep into the marble floors. It was the scent of an intruder. By the grand, sweeping staircase, a pair of brazenly red stiletto heels lay discarded, a flash of scarlet sin against the pristine white marble. They were cheap, garish, and so utterly out of place they might as well have been a flag planted by a conquering army. Every detail was a fresh wound, another twist of the knife that only hardened her resolve. She followed the faint sound of music, a vapid pop song, its bass thumping softly from the direction of the library. Her sanctuary. The room filled with first editions and the scent of old paper and leather, the one place in the world she had felt truly at peace. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open silently and stood in the threshold, a spectral figure cloaked in righteous fury. And she watched. They were on the deep green Chesterfield sofa, the one her grandfather had given her, the one where she and Anthony had dreamed of their future. They weren't just kissing. It was a desperate, fevered entanglement, a tangle of limbs and hungry mouths. He was devouring the woman beneath him, a fiery redhead whose silk robe had fallen open, revealing the smooth, pale skin of her back. Lillian registered with a strange, detached coldness that the robe was hers. It was a custom-made piece from La Perla, a gift from Anthony on their 5th anniversary. The pain she expected, the raw, visceral agony of witnessing the ultimate betrayal, was strangely muted. It was there, a deep tectonic ache beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by an immense crystalline calm. It was the eye of the storm, a place of pure, unadulterated focus. This was not a moment for tears. It was a moment for judgment. She let the silence stretch, allowing them to marinate in their sordid little world for a few seconds longer. Then she cleared her throat. It wasn't a loud sound, not a gasp or a sob, but a soft, perfectly modulated ahem that sliced through the cloying pop music like a guillotine. The effect was instantaneous. They sprang apart as if electrocuted, their faces a comical tableau of horror and disbelief. Sienna scrambled to pull the silk robe around her, her face flushing a blotchy, panicked red. Anthony's head whipped around, and when he saw Lillian standing there, all the color drained from his handsome face. He looked as though he had seen an apparition, a specter summoned from the grave to haunt him. Lillian. He breathed, his voice a strangled, pathetic rasp. My God. What? What are you doing here, I thought. The hospital. You thought I was in the hospital? Lillian finished for him, her voice as cool and smooth as the marble in the foyer. She took a deliberate step into the room, her presence instantly commanding the space. Her eyes, cold and unflinching, flicked from his face to the woman cowering on the sofa. You thought I was dying. A convenient thought, I'm sure. But as you can see, reports of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. Her gaze settled on Sienna, pinning her with an unnerving intensity. And you, she said, her tone dripping with a sweet, venomous politeness, must be Sienna, the special lady from the flower shop. It's a pleasure to finally put a face to the hospitality. Anthony has always been so thoughtful about making his guests feel at home. Sienna's emerald eyes, which Lillian was sure were usually full of fire and defiance, were now wide with pure animal fear. She opened her mouth, but only a small choked sound emerged. Get dressed. Lillian's voice suddenly dropped the ironic pleasantry, vanishing, replaced by a tone of pure, unadulterated steel. The command was not a request. Both of you, now. Anthony, finally jolted from his stupor, began to bluster, his brain scrambling to find a foothold, a way to spin this narrative back into his control. Lillian, listen to me. Please. This isn't what it looks like. Let me explain. We can talk about this. A laugh escaped Lillian's lips. It was a startling sound in the heavy silence, short, sharp, and utterly devoid of humor. Explain. Oh, Anthony, I'm sure you could. You could sell ice in the Arctic. You've built an empire on your explanations, on your dazzling hollow promises. But the performance is over. I'm no longer your audience. She moved with a fluid grace, walking past him as if he were a piece of furniture. She approached the grand antique mahogany desk, her desk, the one that had belonged to her father. From her Chanel handbag, she produced a single, crisp white envelope and placed it squarely in the center of the polished wood. The gesture was theatrical, deliberate, final. This, she announced, her voice resonating with a cold legal finality, is a formal eviction notice. It gives you and your guest 24 hours to vacate the premises. Anthony stared at the envelope as if it were a coiled viper. The word eviction seemed to short-circuit his brain. Eviction, Lillian, be reasonable. This is my house. The words were a desperate, reflexive cry of a man whose power was slipping through his fingers like sand. Is it? Lillian tilted her head, her expression one of feigned curiosity. That's funny. I just reviewed the deed this morning. It must have been an oversight on your part, but your name appears absolutely nowhere on it. The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. She saw the recognition, the dawning horror in his eyes. The prenuptial agreement. The ironclad clause his lawyers had fought so hard against, the one Lillian had quietly, stubbornly insisted upon. A relic from a time when she was simply being prudent, never imagining she would one day wield it as a weapon. Lillian, you can't be serious, he pleaded, his voice cracking, the powerful CEO replaced by a desperate, cornered man. This is our home, our life. No, Anthony, she corrected him, her voice dropping to an icy whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. She stepped closer to him, forcing him to meet her gaze. This is my home, and you are no longer welcome in it. She turned her attention one last time to Sienna, who had managed to pull on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, looking small and pathetic without her borrowed silken armor. As for you, Lillian said, her eyes raking over the younger woman with a look of withering dismissal. I suggest you gather up your little trinkets, the shoes, the bags, whatever baubles he bought to purchase your silence and your company, and you disappear. Because I assure you, you do not want to be in this house when the sheriff's department arrives tomorrow at noon to escort any remaining trespassers from my property. The threat, delivered with such calm certainty, hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The fantasy world Sienna had been living in shattered into a million pieces. The mansion, the couture, the future she had imagined, it was all a mirage. She was a trespasser, a temporary amusement. She shot a desperate, pleading look at Anthony, but he couldn't meet her eyes. He was a broken statue, his pedestal crumbling beneath him. Without another word, Lillian turned her back on them both. She walked out of the library, her posture erect, her steps measured and sure. She didn't slam the door. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The Queen had made her move. Checkmate. The subsequent 24 hours within the mansion were a frantic, suffocating hell. The opulent rooms that had been the backdrop for their illicit affair now felt like a gilded prison. Anthony, in a state of panicked disbelief, paced the marble floors like a caged animal. He made a flurry of calls, first to Lillian, which went straight to an emotionless voicemail, then to his lawyers, a team of sharks who had navigated billion-dollar mergers for him. Their response was swift and unanimous. The deed was ironclad. The house was hers. He had no legal recourse. He was, in the eyes of the law, a guest who had overstayed his welcome. The passion between him and Sienna curdled into bitter, toxic recrimination. "How could you not tell me?" Sienna shrieked at him, her face streaked with tears and running mascara. "You let me believe this was our life. I never said it was our life." He shot back, his voice raw with desperation and self-loathing. "I said you could stay here. It was temporary. Did you really think I'd leave my wife for you?" The cruel words, spoken in a moment of pure panic, hung between them, ugly and irrevocable. Sienna began to pack, a frantic, tearful tornado of activity. She threw clothes into a suitcase, her hands shaking as she realized the vast majority of the wardrobe in the closet was not hers. The Chanel bags, the Hermès scarves, the Cartier watch on her wrist. They were props in a play, and the play was over. They belonged to the role, not to her. The next day at precisely noon, a black and white cruiser from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department pulled silently through the main gates and up the driveway. Lillian was in her Bentley, parked across the street, watching from behind the tinted privacy glass. Her face was an impassive mask, her eyes hidden behind dark Dior sunglasses. She watched as Anthony and Sienna emerged from the front door, blinking in the harsh midday sun. They looked haggard and defeated. Anthony, usually impeccably dressed, was in a rumpled shirt, his face unshaven. Sienna, her fiery hair a mess, clutched a single overstuffed suitcase. They were no longer the golden couple from the poolside. They were two exiles banished from paradise. They walked down the driveway, their steps heavy with shame. As they passed her car to get into a waiting yellow cab, Anthony's head turned. For a split second, his eyes met hers through the glass. She saw in them a maelstrom of regret, loss, and a flicker of the man she had once loved. Sienna shot a look of pure, venomous hatred in her direction. Lillian didn't react. She offered no gesture, no word, no sign of triumph. She simply watched as the taxi pulled away, carrying the wreckage of her marriage down the sun-dappled street and out of her life. She had won. The house was hers. The victory was absolute. But as she put the Bentley in drive and pulled through the gates of her reclaimed kingdom, she felt no elation, only a profound, cavernous emptiness. The Queen was back on her throne, but the castle felt cold and desolate, and the silence was the loudest sound of all. The fallout from that final frigid confrontation on Bellagio Road was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, seismic shockwave that radiated outward, cracking the polished veneer of Los Angeles's most elite circles. The story of Anthony and Lillian Hayes, whispered at first in hushed tones over clinking champagne glasses at a charity gala at the Getty, became a full-blown narrative, devoured by a society starved for high-stakes drama. It was the ultimate cautionary tale, a delicious cocktail of infidelity, hubris, and the quiet, unexpected power of a wife who held the ultimate trump card. Anthony, the titan of industry, the man whose name was etched onto the city's skyline, experienced a fall from grace so swift and so absolute it was almost biblical. The charisma that had once charmed investors and disarmed rivals now seemed like a cheap parlor trick. His carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of audacious deals, and an unshakable self-belief began to crumble. The Singapore project, the behemoth deal he had used as the very alibi for his deceit, was the first casualty. The consortium of international investors, men who prized stability and reputation above all else, grew skittish. The whispers of scandal of a messy public divorce were enough to make them pull back. The project was indefinitely stalled, a towering monument to his own spectacular failure. His calls to Lillian, once filled with blustering attempts at justification, then pleading, finally ceased altogether. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the specter of his public humiliation. He retreated from the public eye, his name disappearing from the society pages, and the business journals replaced by a void of speculation and rumor. He was a king without a kingdom, a man who had traded an empire for a fleeting, foolish dalliance. Sienna, the firecracker who had believed she was on the cusp of conquering Hollywood, found herself extinguished. The story had painted her not as a romantic heroine, but as a foolish, grasping opportunist. The producers who had once praised her star quality no longer returned her calls. The roles she was offered were no longer the complex leading ladies she had dreamed of, but bit parts caricatures of the other woman. The Bel Air dream dissolved into the harsh, unforgiving glare of the San Fernando Valley sun. She moved into a nondescript apartment complex in Sherman Oaks. The vibrant, expensive clothes she had left behind in Lillian's closet, a constant, bitter reminder of the life she had so briefly, so foolishly believed was hers. The Chanel bags and Harry Winston diamonds were gone, replaced by the crushing weight of her own naivete. She had flown too close to the sun, and the fall had scorched her wings. Meanwhile, Lillian became an enigma, a figure of quiet fascination. In a city that often celebrated the loudest voice in the room, her silence was deafening. She was the woman who had been profoundly wronged, but had refused to play the victim. She had not leaked stories to the press, had not engaged in a messy public battle. She had simply quietly and devastatingly reclaimed what was hers. Her strength was not in her anger, but in her control. She was a modern-day icon of resilience, a woman who had faced the ultimate betrayal and had emerged not with a thirst for vengeance, but with an unshakable sense of her own worth. But behind the imposing gates of the Bellagio Road mansion, the victor's spoils felt cold and hollow. The house, her masterpiece, her sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage of memory. Every room was a stage for a ghost play, scenes from a marriage that was now a lie. The scent of Sienna's perfume, a cloying sweet jasmine, seemed to have seeped into the very walls, a phantom presence she could not scrub away. She hired a professional cleaning crew, a team of discreet, efficient women, who moved through the house like surgeons excising any trace of the other woman. They packed away the garish, out-of-place clothes, the unfamiliar cosmetics, the cheap novels left on the bedside table. They aired out the rooms, polished the floors until they gleamed, and replaced the tainted linens with crisp, clean fret sheets. Yet the house remained haunted. One afternoon, Lillian walked into the grand library, the heart of the home, the room where she and Anthony had spent countless hours, their lives intertwined like the intricate patterns on the Persian rug. She ran her hand along the worn leather of his favorite armchair and felt a wave of nausea. The betrayal was a physical presence, an invisible stain that no amount of cleaning could remove. The final straw came on a quiet Sunday morning. She walked into the master suite, the California sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She saw the bed, a vast expanse of white, and the image of Anthony and Sienna, their bodies entwined, flashed in her mind with searing, brutal clarity. The room, once a haven of intimacy and love, was now a crime scene. In that instant, a profound, unshakable clarity washed over her. She could not heal here. To stay would be to live forever in the shadow of her own heartbreak. That afternoon, she made a call that would sever the final tie to her old life. She contacted Eleanor Vance, a formidable real estate agent known for her discretion and her Rolodex of ultra-wealthy international buyers. "Eleanor, it's Lillian Hayes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm ready to sell." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Lillian Eleanor finally replied, her voice a mixture of surprise and concern. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Lillian said, and the words felt like a liberation. The decision was a catalyst. It was a declaration of independence, a promise of a new beginning. She began the process of dismantling her life, of sorting through the accumulated artifacts of a 15-year marriage. It was a painful, cathartic archaeology. She unearthed old photo albums, the smiling faces of a younger, more hopeful version of herself, and Anthony staring back at her. There they were on their honeymoon in the Amalfi Coast, their faces alight with love and promise. There they were at the groundbreaking ceremony for Anthony's first skyscraper, his arm wrapped proudly around her shoulder. She looked at these images not with anger but with a deep, aching sadness, a mourning for the love that had been lost for the man Anthony had once been, or at least the man she had believed him to be. The divorce was a quiet, clinical affair. Anthony, a man stripped of his arrogance, was a ghost of his former self. He did not fight. He did not contest her terms. He signed the papers in his lawyer's office, his hand trembling slightly, his signature a final pathetic surrender. Lillian did not ask for a dime of his vast fortune. She had her own money, a substantial inheritance from her parents, and the quiet confidence of a woman who had always known her own worth. All she wanted was the house, the one asset that was unequivocally hers, and the freedom to walk away. With the mansion sold to a reclusive tech billionaire and the divorce papers finalized, Lillian stood at a precipice. The map of her life, once so clearly defined, was now a blank page. The possibilities were terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She was 42 years old, childless, and utterly, completely free. For weeks she drifted. She traveled, revisiting the places that held meaning for her, not as a wife, but as a woman alone. She walked the cobbled streets of Paris, spent a quiet week in a ryokan in Kyoto, and found a strange, stark beauty in the deserts of New Mexico. But she was searching for something more than a change of scenery. She was searching for a place to put down new roots, a place where the ghosts of her past could not find her. She remembered a dream she had once had long before Anthony, a dream of a simpler life, a life connected to the earth. She remembered her passion for architecture, not for the grand, opulent statements she had once designed, but for the quiet beauty of restoring something old, of breathing new life into forgotten spaces. And so, on a whim, guided by a deep, intuitive pull, she booked a flight to Florence. From there she rented a small Fiat and drove into the rolling hills of Tuscany, a landscape that seemed to have been painted by the old masters. She found it by accident, a small, neglected vineyard with a crumbling stone farmhouse, its windows like sad, empty eyes looking out over a valley of olive groves and cypress trees. The place was a ruin. The roof sagged, the fields were overgrown, and the air was thick with the dust of decades of neglect. But Lillian saw beyond the decay. She saw the good bones of the house, the ancient hand-carved stone, the terracotta tiles baked by centuries of sun. She saw the gnarled, forgotten vines and felt a deep, primal connection to the land. This was it. This was her new beginning. She bought the vineyard, a transaction that baffled her lawyer and her financial advisor. She traded the pristine, manicured perfection of Bel Air for the rustic, untamed beauty of the Italian countryside. She traded her Chanel suits for work boots and jeans, her Bentley for a dusty second-hand Land Rover. She threw herself into the restoration with a fierce, joyful abandon. She hired local artisans, weathered, taciturn men whose families had worked this land for generations. She communicated with them in her fluent, if slightly rusty Italian, a skill she had acquired during a year abroad in college. She worked alongside them, her hands once soft and manicured, now calloused and stained with paint and plaster. She was not just rebuilding a house. She was rebuilding herself. Each restored stone, each newly planted vine was a piece of her own fractured spirit being mended. She discovered a new rhythm to her days, one dictated not by social calendars and business meetings but by the rising and setting of the sun, the turning of the seasons. She found a quiet joy in the simple things: the taste of a sun-warmed tomato from her garden, the scent of lavender after a rainstorm, the shared laughter over a bottle of Chianti with her new neighbors. The past was not forgotten. The scars remained a faint silvery tracing on her heart, but they were no longer a source of pain. They were a testament to her own resilience, a map of the journey that had brought her here. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Tuscan sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, Lillian sat on the terrace of her newly restored farmhouse. A glass of wine from the first small harvest of her own grapes sat on the table before her. She looked out at the rolling hills, at the orderly rows of vines, at the ancient olive trees, their leaves shimmering like silver in the fading light. She thought of the woman she had been just a year ago, a woman fighting for her life in a sterile hospital room, her world about to shatter. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt a profound and unshakable sense of peace. She had lost a husband, a home, a life she had thought was her destiny. But in the ashes of that life, she had discovered something far more valuable, something no one could ever take away from her herself. She was no longer Lillian Hayes, the wife of a magnate, the queen of a Bel Air castle. She was Lillian, a woman who had weathered the storm and had not only survived, but had learned how to thrive. The game was over, but her true life, she realized, had only just begun. So what do you do when the life you've built crumbles around you? Do you let the rubble bury you, or do you rise from the ashes and build something new, something stronger? Lillian's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself.